Right, so I've got 6 techniques. I don't really want this video to be more than 25 minutes long, so that's just over 4 minutes of technique, minus the intro, minus the outro, minus the reveal, minus the lore section. Let's get going. This is the intro. Leave me a like if you don't hate fun, comment your favourite type of lizard, I guess, and subscribe if you think 6 techniques in less than 4 minutes per technique is a little bit bonkers to get through in one video. Our first stage is to use Duncan's White Star. I will be using the recommended 2 thin coats for this product line, and going over everywhere we're going to be laying down some bright contrast paint later. Basing these areas in white first gives you a nice opportunity to get all those really pigmented bright yellows and reds that we're going to be using to shine as bright as they possibly can. First I need to undress this boy. Let's pop a few things off.
Oh, my legs! My arms! My other arm!
Right, now that's over. let's get into it. The legs seem like a reasonable place to start. They've got a lot of cables on that I am going to be doing in Hazard Stripe Yellow. Slightly frustrating segment is that I've got to colour in all these white rockets, whereas I protected them with liquid mask from the metal on all my war dogs and the other knights, so all these rocket tips are going to have to be painted in white, whereas all the others are already protected and zenithalled ready. Hazard cables is probably one of the most difficult techniques we've got here. It takes a little bit of accuracy and brush control when you're doing the black striping. Let's get into that and let's see how we fare. The brightest yellow known to man, Imperial Fist contrast paint. Slap that straight from the pot over all of the white areas that we've done for these cables. There we go. Brighter than staring directly into the sun. And nice and smooth. Yellows used to be horrible, and now they're easy. Abaddon black now for the stripes. This is where you have to have quite good brush control. Put down some diagonal stripes along one side of the cable. Yes, only one side. That's easier than trying to get them to reach all the way around at this point. Next, connect them from one edge of the end of the black stripes and pull them around a little bit further, keeping in that diagonal direction. Then finally join them up with the stripes above and below them on the last little section. This will create a nice spiral effect to your hazard stripes. Rather than just, bars that go around the cable, you've now got the proper spiraling stripe effect over your cables. The brush control is important, just to make sure that they are neat. Try and leave yellow gaps that are roughly the same size as your black marks and uniform, so you want to try and do them all the same thickness. I repeat this over the rest of the smooth textured cables on this model that I want to be this hazard stripe material. I always like this hazard stripe material, and on these industrial themed boys I think it suits them really well. When you've got a little cable like this one on the top that you can't get all the way around, it's a hell of a lot easier. Just pick a slight diagonal angle and go for it all the way along, being very careful not to hit this textured top I've painted already. There we go. Lovely. Simple. Next up is to use this yellow wash, Cassandora yellow. Look at the age of the pot, still got black tops. Just slap this all over, straight from the pot, trying not to let it pool. This will just give it a nice little bit of depth on the lower areas of the cables. And then we've got Wraith Bone, that will be our highlight. Now this is to make the cables look like shiny plastic cabling. There's 2 types of ways to do this. So for this type of cable, we want to come down from this end, and then we're going to repeat that on the other side. We're trying to hit high points of the cables, just one smooth line in the middle to make it look like a really high shine. There we go. Lovely. Repeat that on all hanging cables that look like this. Now the next style is these ones that point sideways up to the sky, and what we're going to be doing is just picking the highest point on them and giving that the nice shine highlight. Just one smooth highlight from the top. There we go. Shiny plastic. The results, I think, speak for themselves. You'll get better as you go with these. The first one's always a bit jank, and then you get better through the project. If you have a look at the front one and then the back ones there. Lovely little hazard cables all over this model. Red lenses. Now I think this will work with any colour, you just need 2 contrast paints for the same type of colour. A very, very bright one and a darker one. Bile red is our nice bright contrast paint for this one. This is kind of like a neon-y red. I'll be putting this over every little bit of white that I want to be a lens, and the door's top hatch, because that's going to be a nice little red window. I'm going to attempt to paint that in the same style I paint these lenses, and hopefully my technique scales quite well onto this door, because I'm used to doing this technique on just like eye lenses and bits like that. I slapped this on straight from the pot, not too thick, I didn't want it to pool, but you want nice coverage with this bright pigment. The next contrast paint we'll be using is Flesh Tearers Red. Now I thought I'd get ahead of myself here, because this is actually the base colour for the next stage, which is Red Rockets. While the bile red was drying on the rest of the lens areas, I painted the red rockets in this step. While I got the paint out, I might as well use it. When it comes to the lenses, we're just putting a red dot of this dark contrast paint in the middle of the lens, leaving the bile red at the edges and all around the sides. This is to create the kind of depth, like it's glass and there's red behind it. This makes it look kind of shadowy in the middle. The way I made this technique scale up for the door hatch is a little different. I put quite a thick blob of Flesh Tearers Red in the middle, and then wet blended the edges now with bile red over the base coat of bile red. You can see my kind of tapping method there, where I blended it in, get a nice little transition going, and add a little bit more Flesh Tearers to the middle, just to get that depth and darkness back, to make it look like this is a red window into the cockpit of this knight. Getting the darkness now. I came back then after I'd done that with just a damp brush to help blend the edges and make a smooth transition from really bright red to really dark red. And I think it's working. Lovely. You can see it really looks like there's some depth in this window, like there's darkness behind a bright red window pane. Now on to highlighting these lenses to get some shine. Wild Rider Red and back to Duncan's White Scar. That's how we're doing this. Let me show you how. So bottom left I'm going for of all these lenses, and in fact the door hatch. Follow the shape of the lens and put a line of Wild Rider Red. This is to make it look like the light is shining through the lens and hitting the inside of the bottom of the lens itself. For the hatch, I followed the shape round right in the bottom left corner, and then I even went to blending with a little bit of a damp brush, just kind of feathering the edges to make it fade out nicely, like light diffusing into the glass. There we go, really starting to get this glassy look on this now. The white highlight is a smaller line in the top right corner, almost a dot on the very small lenses, but slightly larger and following the shape on the bigger lenses. This is to replicate the high shine on a pane of glass. That little point where the sun catches it. And because of the shape of this pane of glass in the top of the hatch, it needs to be slightly rounded like that. Next we'll use a bit of hard coat over the top just to give it a gloss finish. This will add a bit of extra shine, a bit of real shine, so that'll be good when you're looking at it because the light will bounce off into your eye as it should, as well as the painted shines, which will obviously stay stationary. Got to be careful not to put hard coat on too thick or it will get a bit textured. Nice thin coat, nice and smooth. And here we go. Look at that top hatch specifically. I really like how I've done this. I implore you to try it with maybe greens, blues, see how you go, let me know in the comments if you use it in the future. Red Rockets. This is for all those little tips just peeking out in all your little Games Workshop miniatures there. We've already done the base now with Flesh Tearers Red contrast over Duncan's White Star, so the first highlight will be Evil Sun's Scarlet. We'll be placing these just on the top of the rockets, covering quite a large percentage of the top area, focusing towards the front of the nose cone. Leaving the bottoms nice and shadowy, as you can see in this little shot here. There we go, nice and contrasting. After that we'll be using Wild Rider Red. This is smaller again, focusing more towards the tip of the nose cones again, building up that highlight where the sun would hit it, because there is a slight overhang of the brass trim from this rocket launcher itself. Once we've got that done, you can see that it's nice and highlighted on top, as if the sun's hitting it from above, giving these rockets a bit more of a round feel. And then we'll be going in with some Jokero Orange. This over the top of red makes the red look a little bit faded, like these are maybe older rockets and they've been out in the field being weathered for a little bit of time. This whole storyline behind these knights that they're stolen really plays into the fact that they would be using older ammunition. Nice little faded tips there, really making them stand out from their background. A nice little cinematic reveal shows you how bright these are now in amongst all this bright orange. They still stand out, even though they're a darker colour red. This could be for capes, for loincloths, for any bit of fabric that you don't want to look like it's blended smoothly. You want it to look like textured, because there is no texture on these sculpted elements of your Games Workshop miniatures, and you need to add it yourself. This is the area we're going to be tackling here, this little bit on the shield. This is a little bit of rag tucked in behind a chain, so we're going to go nice and dirty on this one. Starting with some Gargak Sewer, one of my favourite contrast paints. It's a lovely brown. Followed by some Oak Brown and Monster Brown from the Army Painter range. There's a slightly gloss and slightly transparent. So this is good if you're going for like a worn leather effect. It'll give it a nice little bit of shine, but not too much where it's like a shiny plastic or glass look, just a little hint. First of all, slap that Gargak Sewer on straight from the pot, try not to let it pool, and spreading it around on this material. The material has still got the Zenithal undercoat that we did in the priming video. I'll put a link in the top corner if you want to watch that. Afterwards I put a little bit of the two browns on my palette here, and then got my lovely soft makeup brushes. These are great for stippling effects and dry brushing. I'm going to be starting with stippling, just catching the raised edges and laying down some texture. Now with the next brown, I'm using a mix between dry brushing and stippling really, just to lay down a little lighter texture, but I want this to look a little bit more dusty, like it's really worn edges. There we go, nice bit of texture on there. Simple, easy technique, like I said, would look lovely on a cape. We're really getting there with the fine details on this model now, and this is just a small bit, but it adds a lot seeing as the rest of the model has some decent textures all over it. And of course it wouldn't be Chaos without a few skulls here and there on it. We're going to be using the standard Citadel approach. Let me teach you how to do that. Base of Zandri Dust, the classic bone-based colour from Games Workshop. 2 thinned coats, Duncan style, is probably the best way to go about this because it is quite a thick pigmented paint. After this we'll be stepping in with some Seraphim Sepia Wash, just to get those nooks and crannies looking a bit more yellowy and aged. After this step we're going to do something quite classic in Games Workshop heavy metal style painting, which is then go back to the base coat colour, so we'll be heading back to the Zandri Dust. Obviously we're not looking for the coverage we got last time, this is going to start going where the highlights will be in the future. We're starting to build up the nice lighter tones off the skulls with this. Just on the top where the sun would hit, cheekbones, bottom of eye sockets, teeth, picking out little details now so it's not all one yellowy blur. Up now through the bone colours, starting with Ushabti bone. In the sections that you've put that Zandri dust, you will now do smaller areas of Ushabti bone, leading towards things like edge highlights around the sockets and just little bits on the top of the teeth, and a slightly larger area on the top of the head. 2 thin coats again suggested, just to get a nice blend going. Do smaller area with the second thin coat, but make sure you've got the coverage, because you don't want the base coat to be showing through a little bit spotty. That subtracts from the smoothness of your layering. On to Screaming Skull now, and we're just doing little edge highlights of everything. Eye sockets, little area on top of the skull. Just where the sunlight would hit it. Now this, as I said, is the classic GW bone recipe, and I think is solid. It holds up and has held up over the years, and I use it on every skeleton I ever paint. Textured cables. Time for cables, part 2. That doesn't mean anything rude to Americans, it's a peace sign.
Or at least
But to us it means f*** you, f*** you. This is very simple. Along these textured cables at the back here, I'm going to be painting a bad and black base with a null wash. Now I'm not going to insult your intelligence and make you watch me paint black and wash with black. The wash is just to bring down the shine because GW paints are a bit satin. You probably could get away without the wash if you had some kind of black base coat colour from another brand. Afterwards we're left with these cables in this kind of black state here. Now these are very ridged and textured, so we're going to be dry brushing with my lovely makeup brushes again. We're going to be putting the highlights in the same kind of position, that little thin highlight for the plastic look on the hazard stripe cables. We'll be using Thunderhawk Blue for the first highlight on these, followed by some Blue Horror just for the smaller highlight, just to give it a bit more height on the highlights and more depth in the shadows. First of all, get some on the palette and then wipe it off on my hand using my veteran moisture sensors to tell when the paint is ready to go on the model. So coming down from the 2 bits where it connects to the machine for cables that hang downwards. And for cables that come upwards showing their edge, just on the highest point there. Something interesting about these interleg pieces here, which will be highlighted the same, is that the highlight isn't where you think. It's not going to be coming directly down like the highlight on the cables. And that's because the body sits on top here. As you can see if I can get it at the right angle, the shadow from the body blocks the light coming down from the top. So we're going to want to highlight this bit here at the front instead, rather than the top. And the same with the back. The highlight is not on the top at the back, it's on the front section at the back. So very carefully moving sideways over it because that's the way the detail is orientated, so I can catch the edges if I go sideways rather than up and down on these. You always want to move against the grain of the detail and kind of, if you can, with the flow of the light. So you won't dry brush up unless the light is from below, obviously. With the Blue Horror highlights, I'm going to switch from my nice makeup brushes back to my Army Painter dry brush. I'm doing this because it's got a smaller tip on it and I can get more accuracy. I like to have quite a little amount of paint on the brush for this bit. If you're doing a very light end highlight with the dry brushing, I really like you to have to work for that highlight to get on the model. Have to give it multiple passes with a very dry brush. Really drying this one out on my hand now, so I have to work for that final highlight just to get that hint of colour, because I don't want to paint this light blue. I still want this to read as kind of a blacky grey pipe. It's nice to use blues as highlights for blacks rather than greys because I feel it's harder to get it to read as a black using grey. It will just read as very dark grey. But if the majority of the area you're highlighting is black and then you use blues, it's obviously not a blue area, it's a black area. So this must be how it looks when the light hits those high points. If you look at black clothes and black objects in your house, they don't go grey when the light hits them in the corner, they go kind of off black bluey colour most of the time. Sometimes even purples. Purples work well for edge highlighting black as well. All the cables are looking good. The textured cable looks good mixed in with these hazard stripe cables. They look very different and like their function is different. Maybe these textured cables are part of pneumatics instead of wiring. The hazard stripe cables definitely look like they're for wiring. So now we've got a nice variety of functions on the model. Now I'm going to give you a quick blaster lore in this video because we're moving through everything super fast. This lore section I'm going to start calling Lizard Lore. Makes a lot of sense. Let me tell you about these Vulture Boys. After the gang known as the Vultures removed these Imperial Knights from their hangar, they took them off-world to their home planet. A jungle planet, a hot, sweaty environment where everything rusts really quick, so scrap is valuable as it degrades very, very fast. They repainted these knights and set their own house up amongst the other scrappers, called House Wrecked, spelled R-E-K-T. Now that's going to go on a bunch of stuff that I'm going to freehand, and now I've said that in a video, I can't go back on it. House Wrecked then took over the scrap scene. They become the dominant force on their scrapper planet, using these new lifted machines from the Imperium. The whole world starts to kneel to House Wrecked. Their world very small and very stupid, but very eager to use their newfound power to dominate nearby planets and trawl them for treasures made of iron and steel. The best way to find scrap is also to make scrap. Now with their war machines ready, they started heading to war and destroying other forces to drag back their salvage. This is why they took the iconography of the vulture skull as their helmets for these war dogs and knights. They're beasts of prey, looking for carcasses of metallic victims to pick over and take back to their lair. This is one of my videos I filmed last week. I filmed 2 in a row last week. I feel like this one's better. The algorithm has gone back to normal and decided it doesn't like me. It decided it loved me for a while, over 5,000 views on a couple of videos. Now I can't crack 1k. So if you know someone who would benefit from these techniques, please share this video with them. It would help them and it would help moi. So if you're feeling kind, be a pal, like and subscribe, and remember, it's not a pile of shame, it's a pile of future fun.